Recently, Dave Chappelle published a video. I can't really call it stand-up, more of like a speech called 8:46, 8 minutes and 46 seconds. It's a very, very powerful video, and I've got some thoughts on it. The first and most interesting thing is that what I'm not seeing from a lot of people when they highlight Dave Chappelle's whole segment is that he gets dangerously close to warning of some kind of race war or civil war, or at the very least, extreme racial violence. In his video, he talks about the people who lost their lives. And my respect to Dave Chappelle, I think he's an awesome dude. One of the most important things I think about this video segment and why Dave Chappelle is important for what's happening right now is that he recently put out a video special on Netflix where he was extremely anti-PC. He was extremely offensive. And I'm glad he did it. He pushed back on these woke lunatics who have been trying to burn our books. And he gave this speech, I guess. He did this segment, which was a bit funny at times. I think Dave Chappelle is awesome. And in it, he talked about Black Lives Matter and the lives that were lost and what these things lead to. And you know what? I agree almost entirely with what he was saying. He wasn't talking about taxing Amazon. He wasn't talking about changing universities or anything like that. He was talking about people being killed and the repercussions of that. He also then ragged on Laura Ingraham, Don Lemon, and Candace Owens, and I laugh at that too. You know what I see when I see Dave Chappelle? I see somebody who probably actually speaks to people in a similar area politically to me. When he did his Netflix special and he did the Chinese face joke, where it was a very obvious like 1920 stereotype joke, guess what? I'm part Asian. I laughed. I loved it. I did. Because he can make fun of me. We can make fun back. He can have a good time. And he recognizes that some things are just jokes. But he also talked about serious issues that he felt was impacting his community that needed to be rectified. And whether or not you agree with him or not, he brought up very, very important points. The one thing I like to bring up when it comes to any political issue is not so much is to point out that what matters is not so much what is true, but what people think is true. Now, I'm not saying objective reality is not important. It is. It's paramount. We need to have the facts straight to be able to solve these problems. But what you need to consider is that humans react emotionally. So if you want to get to the core of what this problem is, the problem, in my opinion, is not first and foremost, whether or not there is an issue of police brutality targeting the minority community. Although to Dave Chappelle and Black Lives Matter, it is. I respect their position. The issue is something is creating this perception. For one, it may actually be the problem of police brutality, of which I think there are some issues we can deal with. I'm totally for police reform. It could also be that there is a media problem that is fanning the flames. At the very least, I need to sit down and better understand why it is someone like Dave or anyone from Black Lives Matter would feel this way. Or in the inverse, why would a Trump supporter feel the way they do? That's why I absolutely love sitting down with people of different political persuasions. Maybe it's true that there's a media problem that's fanning the flames and making things worse when it's not really that bad. Maybe it's true there really is a police brutality problem. If you don't address it by sitting down and asking, you'll never really know, and the problem will only get worse. So let me put it this way. First and foremost, objective reality is extremely important. If it is not true that there is a police brutality problem, we got to deal with that because we got a perception problem. And if it is true there is a problem, we got to deal with that because we got a problem. At the very least, here's the way I see it. Dave Chappelle is focused on these circumstances that are very real, very, very real. The question about disproportionality in policing is less relevant to the fact that people have been killed. Dave Chappelle sees a story like George Floyd, and he highlights it. Why? Because it's something that speaks to his community. We then see a lot of conservatives highlighting Tony Timpa. Why? It speaks to their community. I look at both and say, hey, man, I respect both positions. Neither of those dudes should have been killed the way they were. So if that's the case, let's talk about how we make sure it never happens again. I think the simple solution is guaranteeing our Fifth Amendment rights. The violation of due process and life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Let's be real. But we have to have a real conversation about what's making people feel this way. Now, that being said, because I've talked about that many times, I think what Dave Chappelle highlights in the segment that's so important, and I hope you've seen the segment, maybe you haven't, because I know not everybody agrees with it. He brings up Christopher Dorner. He brings up a couple other people, a guy in Dallas. He didn't bring up the guy in New York, which he should have. But let me just tell you what he's bringing up. And then we'll read a little bit about what the Washington Post says and his criticisms for, Candace Owens and Don Lemon. Candace Owens. He brings up that if we don't deal with this, you end up with crazy dudes taking weapons and hurting people. He brings up this guy, Chris Dorner. I don't know if you remember this story. He was a black police officer who, and I'll tell you the story as Dave Chappelle told it, because I want you, the point I'm trying to make is to understand what he's saying and how we can deal with his feelings and what may lead to more violence. This guy Dorner, apparently, according to the story, witnessed police brutality. He reported it. He got fired. He did everything he could to get his job back. They didn't care. And I truly believe there was a problem here. Well, what he did, in my opinion, was the wrong thing to do. And I believe it made things worse. What this guy did was he wrote a manifesto. In it, he wrote down people he really liked. One of those people, he said he thought Dave Chappelle was a genius. Dave says in the story that when he was flying to LA, the cops called him and told him we could, protect you because he mentioned you in the manifesto. Dave gave a rather hilarious response. He's like, I read that manifesto. He likes me. Now, what can I do for you, to protect you, right? It was funny. But this guy ended up killing people who had nothing to do with the situation. Apparently, he killed a kid, a child of one of these cops. Now, the cops responded with hardcore retaliation. Dave mentions like 400 people show up. My understanding of the story is that he was locked in a shed of some sort. And depending on who you ask, the cops may have torched the building with him in it. I don't like this story. I don't like what happened in Dallas. You remember what happened in Dallas? A guy with a rifle took out a bunch of cops during a protest. It was horrifying. Let me tell you something. I lived on Myrtle in Nostrand. You may know my buddy Adam from the Timcast IRL podcast. He lived a block away from me because we hung out. We lived in the same area. 1 block down was, I believe it was Tompkins and Nostrand, I believe. Maybe it was the name of the street. So, maybe it was Tompkins. So anyway, this guy on the street in 2014, while I was there sitting in my apartment, killed 2 cops. And he said, you take one of ours, or you take 2 of ours, you take 2 of yours, something like that. It was in reference to Eric Garner and Michael Brown. Dave Chappelle made a very important point in this segment that there's going to be some kind of extreme reaction from extremists. And he didn't glorify it. He just told the stories. And I think he gave an apt warning to people. I thought it was truly fascinating that he was kind of entertaining this Civil War type story, that if something isn't done about this, these things are going to happen, and people have been warning you about it. So let me do my best to try and break this down. First, one of the criticisms of Dave Chappelle is that when he got rich, he moved to an overwhelmingly white suburb or whatever, and I think that kind of misses the point. Dave Chappelle isn't ragging on capitalism. That's what we get from these far left people infiltrating and manipulating. Dave Chappelle is rich, and he's a funny guy. When he was asked at one of his comedy specials, what would he do if Donald Trump got reelected? He sits down and laughs and goes, probably get a tax cut. And everybody laughs. He's clearly a capitalist dude. He's fine with being offensive. He's funny. I think he's awesome. There are a lot of people who disagree with his assessment over the police brutality as to whether or not it's real. But I want to set that aside and simply say, here's a man of respect who's clearly on the side of free speech and free expression, who's telling you something bad will come if this isn't dealt with in some capacity. He's not threatening anybody. He's just telling you there's pain, there's suffering, this perception exists. Guess what? He's right. And you know what else I see that you can't ignore? There's similar pain, not the same, but there's similar pain among Trump supporters. I recognize that exact same thing. When the factories were being destroyed, when jobs were being lost, and I saw that video, man. I can't remember where I saw this video. I can't remember what it was, but it was like some middle-class dude crying, saying, thank you, Trump, because over the past few years, with his factory closed, he was burning through his savings, and he thought he was going to lose his house, his kids would go hungry, and then Trump came back, the factory came back and saved his life. And I saw that pain, and I said, man, people are just trying to do right. They're trying to make sure they're trying to make sure they survive. That's the average person. For the people in the black community, like Dave Chappelle mentions, they see these issues of cops, and I can understand that because I grew up on the south side of Chicago. And then I see the people who counter that, and it leaves me curious. I see the feelings Dave has, and I think we have to figure out what's causing those feelings, whether it's real, whether it's not, whatever you think, doesn't matter. It exists. The feelings exist. We got to deal with that. Otherwise, Dave's right. You will get more Dorners. You will get more people like this. We can't have that. The Trump supporters make a great point too. Hillary Clinton was not addressing their pain and their issues and was not speaking to them. Man, how do you create How do you find that leader is actually going to talk to people and say, let me see where your pain is coming from, where this problem is coming from, and how we overcome this? Instead, you get people who are fighting for their cause and demonizing the other. I don't think Dave Chappelle does that. And that's why I like the segment he did. And I think there are a lot of Trump supporters, and probably to a certain degree myself, I play into this too with the segments I do. But I think people often point the finger at the other a bit too much. I'd like to see people recognize the problems without feeling like it's an attack on you. You know, I've seen the arguments about Black Lives Matter and how they say it shouldn't be perceived as an attack on conservatives or what conservatives believe. And I think there's a fair point to be made there. I think all lives matter shouldn't be seen as an attack on Black Lives Matter either. It's weird to me that people view this as like a disregarding their position. And that's what bums me out about the whole situation that we saw with George Floyd so far. That you had a real opportunity to unite people, but there really are interests in keeping us separated and keeping us, torn apart. I don't know, man. This is gonna turn into a really long rant. I'm probably not gonna get to the points that I want to make, but let me just tell you this. I hope I made a clear point to you, at least in some regard, having to do with this segment, that your feelings have merit. That when white people say they don't like being attacked online and they don't think that's fair to call them all racist and to say they're all privileged, I completely agree. There are poor people in this country who grew up in the gutter, and it's unfair to blame them and point the finger at them. I think Dave Chappelle says we see people in our community being killed and it's causing pain and there's going to be, action. And I hear you, man. So how about this? How about we come together to the best of our abilities? My biggest criticism, and I want to make sure I can do better in the future to focus it, is not with Dave Chappelle or Black Lives Matter. It's with the woke lunatics with this ideology that would take his cause away from him and that would change it. And this is coming off the previous segment I just did, where at the Chaz in Seattle, they booed some black women who are saying you're hijacking the movement, because I think they are. And the media is doing everything to allow them to do it. I really feel like exploitative media is the biggest problem we have. I know I get accused of being in a similar vein, but I really try not to be that. Maybe I'm not perfect, but I'm biased. And maybe that's the real problem. I don't know. Maybe there's no way to solve this, but I'll tell you what. I'm going to listen. I'm going to listen to the guy in the MAGA hats who says, here's the problems I see and here's what I want fixed. I'm going to listen to Dave Chappelle when he says the same thing. Let me leave that, as the main point of what I'm seeing from this. I'm a big fan of Dave Chappelle, man. I think he's fighting the good fight on free speech and free expression, and I think he sees something we should pay attention to. It doesn't mean he's always right, but it means that the pain exists. And I'm going to say the same thing about the Trump supporters and Donald Trump and what he represents. And I'm going to try and do my best to say, hey, man, how about we all sit down at the end of the day, have a drink, and just talk about how we can live together peacefully? Because guess what? When you take the people that hate each other and you sit them down, it becomes really difficult for them to maintain that, to be honest. I don't have all the answers. I don't. I wish we had a good leader who could unify. I don't know who that could be. I'm not saying Trump doesn't try to do that. I'm just saying maybe the media, in my opinion, I think the media is the biggest problem of all, to be completely honest. But I can't rant on this too much longer. Whatever. Maybe I didn't hit everything I want to say. I'll leave it there. Let me know what you think about Dave's comedy special on George Floyd and whatever you think about it. And let's have conversations, man. That's the best we can do, right? Respect to all, to the best of my abilities. I got one more segment coming up in a few minutes, and I will see you all shortly.